The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Breaking humanity, one soul at a time. This is the World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.
You're very welcome along to this week's edition of The World You Don't Know with myself, Mick O'Connell. Now, and I have a great guest coming up now. We've got a gentleman called Nicholas Kollerstrom coming on now in a minute. Now, I'll just give you a little brief bio of who Nicholas is. He's an English author who is known for writing several very controversial books in relation to conspiracy theories in relation to the Holocaust. He's formerly an honorary research fellow in science and technology at University College London, UCL. He's the author of several books including Gardening and Planting by the Moon, an annual series beginning back in 1980, Newton's Forgotten Lunar Theory from 2000, Crop Circles from 2002, and most notably Terror on the Tube, which is what we're going to be talking about here tonight. Now, what is Terror on the Tube? Well, cast your mind back to 2005 to the London tube attacks. I've spoken about those attacks many times in this show, and how it's my belief and a lot of people's belief that they were false flag attacks to further a globalist agenda. Now, Kollerstrom has been involved in a variety of issues as a political activist. In 1986 he co-founded the Belgrano Action Group after the sinking of the General Belgrano by the Royal Navy during the Falklands War, another false flag. And from 2006 he argued that the 7th July 2005 London bombings had not been carried out by the men accused of them. Anyway, I'm going to go straight to Nick, and because we've got an hour to get this interview underway. As I said, there was no news at the top of the hour. There's no news on Liffey Sound now for the foreseeable future, folks, so if you need to hear the news, you'll have to try and find it somewhere else. Anyway, I'm going to go straight to Nick. Good evening, Nick. Hello? I did have him. If you just bear with me there, folks, now, and I'm just going to check my Skype to see what's going on here. He was on there a second ago. No, he jumped back out, but I'm going to ring him. I'm going to dial him back in there now, and hopefully we'll get him back on. Hello, good evening, Nick.
Oh, hello, Nick.
How you doing?
Right?
Grand. Can you move away from your microphone a little bit? There's a little bit of a crackle off it.
Oh, I don't know about that.
That's it now. That's much better now. Wherever you're sitting now,
better?
That's much better. Yeah, that's perfect.
Right.
I can turn the volume up my end and you'll sound a lot louder anyway, so that's not a problem. Fine. Now, I read out a small bio of you there, that you're a former, well, you are an author, but you were a research fellow in science and technology at the University College London. But I've watched a couple of your videos today, a few shows that you've appeared on, just to get myself abreast of exactly who you are. Now, I've been aware of your stuff for quite a number of years, Nick, and I've been quite a follower of your work and an admirer of your work. Now, I did mention to you earlier on John Anthony Hill, and that was one of the videos I watched. You had done a show with John Anthony Hill. I think it was the Moore show.
Sure.
Yeah, and it was a great show. I really enjoyed listening to it. You know, and you came across very well on it. Now, we're going to be talking about false flags, and for those of you out there who don't know what false flags is, most of my listeners would know what a false flag is. It's when a government launches an attack on itself in order to blame someone else, i.e. they hang the flag of another nation or a group they want to vilify and something like that. Right. So tell me, what got you into all of this, Nick?
Well, Mick, first of all, at the beginning of this new century, I think that's the place to begin, I became an enthralled member of London's 9/11 Truth Group, okay? I enjoyed listening to these experts talking about what had brought down the Twin Towers and what had really happened and what planes had gone where, you know. And it was all, I just loved it all. And then the London bombing happened in 2005, and that was just where my college was and where I'd always lived. And so I was, got drawn into that. And one thing or another, I sort of checked out some train times that the government had stated, and I got drawn into the story. And I suppose I like telling a story. I like writing books, and I ended up writing a book about the London bombing. Right. And it was quite a harrowing experience, really. I was in the midst of all these experts who really had a deep appreciation of the thing, and so I tried to write it out. And also got involved with the BBC, which was rather stressful, and the court trials and stuff. And so I ended up composing this book, and no English publisher would possibly take it. You know, it's totally out of the question. But I found a very good American publisher progressive press in California, and they published it. And that turned out to be virtually almost the only book anyone ever wrote about the London bombings.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of any other book. Now, in relation to the London bombings, the reason I ever expressed an interest in it and had misgivings about it from day one, I know where I was in 2005 when that came on the news. I was actually sitting in my truck. I was sitting on a building site delivering some steel. And I was waiting for the crane driver to take the steel off the truck, but he was delayed, so I was left sitting on the site for over an hour and a half. Anyway, 10 o'clock in the morning, comes on the news, terror attack in London. And what had come on the 10 o'clock news was a report of multiple shootings in Canary Wharf. Now, it was only ever broadcast once, and it was never broadcast again.
Right.
Now, and I didn't think anything of it until I seen 7/7 Ripple Effect, and John Anthony Hill then pointed out that the shootings in Canary Wharf were assassinations of the guys who were involved in the false flag. They were the patsies. And as he explained in the thing I was watching earlier with yourself and himself on the Brown show, or the Moore show, he said that they got wind and they basically copped on that because they were late getting to London that morning, as you pointed out yourself in the book, and John Anthony Hill has pointed out, the train that the government alleged that those guys were on actually ran an hour late, so they couldn't have been on it.
Right.
So they couldn't have been in London when the attacks took place, but when they did arrive into London, they arrived into the thick of it. It was already underway, and they realised then, hang on, we're getting set up here. So they made their way to Canada Square, I think it was, in Canary Wharf, where all the media are located, as opposed to being in Fleet Street where they used to be, to obviously get help and tell the story, but they never made it.
Right. Yeah, Mick. That was the intuition, the great intuition of Moore Dip, called John Anthony West, in his gripping video called The Ripple Effect. And he described just this when most of us in the movement were a bit sceptical. We just thought there's no CCTV. Those four lads never got to London. Somehow we thought they hadn't got there, okay? And then when I went to the inquest, there was a big inquest, 2010, 2011, about the London bombing. I watched the video and I realised he was absolutely right, that they released more CCTV, that those lads really did arrive in King's Cross Station, at least three of them, and they arrived too late, around about 9:15, and panic was already setting in, and the dreadful thing dawned on them, that what they thought was some sort of
training exercise.
Some sort of training exercise for a drill, that's what they would have been told, that it was for real, and maybe they were being set up as the patsies. The dreadful thing dawned on them, and they rushed back, and they basically jumped onto exactly the same train that they'd got off from, the same train line, and that took them very, very easily and quickly to Canary Wharf. And all sorts of media reports around the world, they were gunned down then at 11 o'clock that morning, and that is precisely when the government started saying they'd got four terrorists, after they'd gunned down those lads. And so the second edition of my book accepted this story. The new revised edition you can buy accepted that, which I hadn't initially understood when I first composed the story, Mick.
Yeah, see, the story made sense to me because it was personal to me, because I'd heard that news report and I know exactly what I'd heard, that there had been a shooting in Canary Wharf that morning, but it was only on the 10 o'clock news that morning on Irish radio, and when I went home later on that day from work and I was looking at the news, I couldn't find any more information about it. There was no one talking about it.
Radio. I made a collection of all the different media around the world. I got masses of people posting comments about different places of the media around the world. I'm not sure anyone quite mentioned that Irish news, but it was sort of all over the place, but not.
Well, I think the Irish radio, I think they picked it up off of the International Press Corps, because there is a website. I done some journalism in college, and there is a website that you can go to now. For the life of me, I couldn't tell you what it is now. But I remember we were pointed in the direction of a website. If you're looking for any news, all journalists go to this particular site, and it's basically just claptrap. It's what they want you to rebroadcast on behalf of the government and whatnot.
Yeah.
You know. So I'd imagine they pulled the story from there.
Yeah. Right. Well, if I could continue. From the London bombing, I found myself quite involved in all that, doing interviews and telling the story. And the whole 9/11 Truth group broke up about 2010. That it couldn't be supported anymore, and we started up our own London group called 9/11 Keep Talking, which meets once a month, and it still does. And we would review every time a state-fabricated terror happened around the world, or in Europe, especially in Europe, Brussels, Paris, and we do a review of it, or the Woolwich, for example, and analyse it in our group, and I would then write a blog about it. So what I've done in the last couple of years, I pulled all those together, all those stories, and put them into a book form, and it's really for European readers. It's called Chronicles of State Fabricated Terror, A European Perspective. Okay.
Yep.
It's there's loads and loads of books about 9/11 truth, but there's hardly anything for European readers about the way Europe has been permeated by this dreadful untruth, the ghastly thing that a government would do to its own people, arrange fabricated terror. And I've looked at the amazing evolution of this phenomenon. When it first started with the London bombing and events like that, there were a whole lot of dreadful real deaths, okay, real blood.
And that's the thing about these so-called false flags that, and I'm not saying the false flags, I'm not in these countries, so I don't see these events taking place. No. I've only got to go by what I see in the mainstream media and on the alternative media. Mainstream media, I know, is full of hogwash. I don't believe none of it. It's all propaganda, and it's easy to see when you know what to look for. But for those out there who wouldn't know much about false flags, why are the government doing this? What's the agenda?
Why?
Yeah, why?
Well, that's a good question. That's the great question which is asked in the film V for Vendetta. That's all about would the government, arrange to kill its own citizens, and why would it want to do such a thing? That is the terrible question. I would say this government is fully dedicated to eternal war. I would say what you might metaphysically call the axis of evil is US, UK, Britain, America, and because of this everlasting war that we're in the 21st century, the government's always worked through untruth. What they tell their own people is always untrue, and it's war-ratifying mythology, who to hate and fear, that the government gives its people. And state fabricated terror has a part in all this because it gives you, as it were, the phantom menace. It gives you the bogus enemy image, who you've got to hate and fear. The skill in making state fabricated terror isn't just blowing something up or having a sort of theatre of horror. It's generating an enemy image that doesn't really exist, that there's something set up. You have a patsy who takes the blame, and that patsy has to be silent then. He goes to jail or he's bumped off. So it's a skillful theatre, and the purpose is to ratify enormous arms budgets. You think whatever we spend in this country, 50 billion a year, on military, it's far too much, and this country, it doesn't really need to have an enemy, and because of that enormously inflated budget, endless threats have to be made and seen and perceived, and I'm sorry to say that the British people can be duped, and the British media will not question the fake narratives that are given.
I mean, it's even terrible. One guy I've been listening to quite a lot over the last year, there's someone you'll be well aware of, is David Irving, the author.
Oh, yeah, right. He's a bit past it now. I think he's a bit old.
He's probably in his late 70s or 80s now.
Yeah.
But I've gone back over all his historical work, a lot of his interviews and stuff like that.
It's wonderful.
But he's completely opened my eyes to world history. Now, I mean, I was born in Germany, but I am an Irishman, and so I've always had a keen interest in the Second World War, and I've always wondered, like, why have they painted Adolf Hitler as the embodiment of Satan, I suppose, the embodiment of evil. And I've looked into it, and I've read a couple of his books, I've watched a couple of his documentaries, listened to a good few of his speeches, and I looked at the way the establishment went after him, especially in the Lipstadt trial and stuff like that, and the way they basically what they did with the Lipstadt trial, just before that trial was due to start. I'm sure you're aware, the defence wanted to change their strategy, the defence that they were offering in the libel trial, and then they gave him hundreds of thousands of pages of documents to pour through, less than a week before the trial. So the man hadn't got a chance. It was an open shut case in that respect.
And also, the prosecution witnesses were paid nearly £1 million.
They were paid an awful lot of money as well to testify against them. That's right.
Money, man. How can you bribe witnesses like that? I don't get it at all.
Yeah, and it always brings you back to that adage: if you want to know who rules over you, see who it is you're not allowed to criticise.
Yeah. But if I may mention a recent, fairly small, easy-to-read booklet, Mick, that I've just done, How Britain Initiated Both World Wars. Yeah. Okay. That's a nice, easy-to-read little booklet, and it's very much, obviously, in tune with David Irving. but it's a talk I gave, and I like to suggest that if you want to understand the horrible ruin of British culture and civilization through its dedication to war, that it is helpful to look at how both world wars were initiated by Britain. Why could we not live in friendship with Germany? What a wonderful 20th century we could have had.
It would have been amazing, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah,
and now Saxons, same bone and blood as the British people, and for us to be fighting against them was, the most awful thing. Churchill, he loved war, and he was very much the guy who initiated both of those world wars. He was the first Sea Lord in the case of the First World War. His initiative sent the whole British Navy up to stand right outside Germany at the end of July 1914, while negotiations were still sort of supposedly in process. That's how the Kaiser knew that war was going to begin. And then in the next World War, he's in charge of Bomber Command. He becomes the Prime Minister. He can just ring up Bomber Command, tell them to start shelling Berlin, heavy raid on Berlin. That's, what was that, August 1940. He can just get the wars going because it's what he loved. He loved it. And those who wanted peace were just kind of outwitted. And the British people give in so easily.
What I found most ironic about the Second World War in relation to Britain was that, when you're watching old war movies and old newsreels and all about Britain and all this, it was fighting for British freedom to make sure the Germans didn't take over Britain and to protect the British way of life. And we're taught then that Britain won the Second World War along with the Americans and the Russians. But since the Second World War, since that's been over, the British way of life has been completely decimated.
Decimated, yeah. And also,
from within.
As Irving pointed out from his research on original war documents, Germany never wanted to invade or take over or capture Britain. All it wanted, the very faint, it really always wanted friendship with Britain. That was the great hope of Hitler all his life. The main plank of his foreign policy and his aim in life was to develop Germany so it could have friendship with Britain, analyse what went wrong last time and how they could avoid making the same mistake again. And that had to be very much censored, written out of the story, and instead we get the war myths that have taken over.
I mean, as most people know, history is written by the winners, and it was the Allies who won against Germany. So I mean, they're going to tell us anything they want to tell us.
Yeah.
And that's the great shame of it. I mean, I'm not saying Adolf Hitler was a great man. I didn't know the man. I wasn't around in World War II, but I certainly don't believe the mainstream narrative about what went on in World War II. I think there's more to it than what they're letting us.
I think people are getting fed up with what they've been taught, and the idea that it was a good war. Britain totally violated the norms of international war in bombing cities.
Yeah, Dresden.
Really initiating the bombing of cities on a massive scale, and we built huge bomber planes starting about 1930. Was it about 1939? We started building them, producing them when other countries in Europe didn't. And they were for city bombing. That's what they were for, and the war was fought on that basis. Totally unlawful principle of incinerating cities.
So what do you think was the ultimate reason for them going to war with Germany? Was it because Germany was on the rise financially and stuff like that? Because Hitler had told the international bankers to take a hike, we're not paying you the money?
Yeah, it was. But also British imperialism, the doctrine that it had to oppose the strongest nation in Europe. That was, Churchill reckoned, that was the balance of power doctrine. That out of Germany becoming too strong, therefore we could not have an alliance of friendship with it. We had to oppose it simply because it's a strong nation.
Right.
I mean, I think with both world wars, the question was, could Germany as such be allowed to exist? I mean, the German peoples who had existed in Europe for 1,000 years, they extended beyond the national boundaries of what was defined as Germany. So in 1870, when Germany was formed, there were there were people who felt they were German outside that, most notably Austria, which had always been, the central ruling family of Germany had been in Austria, and that wanted to join with Germany, and it wasn't allowed to. And finally, they did have that union with Austria just before the Second World War. Austria and Germany joined together, so that in itself, bits of German, bits of that considered they were German, wanting to join together with Germany, that was felt to be too much of a challenge, too much of a threat to British,
imperialism.
British imperialism, even though Britain and its empire was vast, about 10 times larger than Germany, but Germany wasn't allowed to
challenge them, I suppose.
Countries that felt they were German weren't allowed to join together as they wanted to.
Right, listen, Nick, I need to go to some ads. Do you mind hanging on for about 2 minutes? That'd be great.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, folks, we'll be back in 2 minutes with Nick Kollerstrom. Talk to us very shortly.
Broadcasting to Lucan, this is Liffey Sound, 96.4 FM.
Don't miss Eddie Graham's sports session this Tuesday as he takes you through all your local sports news on Liffey Sound 96.4 FM.
A Year in Music, the show that plays the hits from the 60s to the present day. Every week we play hits from a new year with me, Paul Gibney, on Liffey Sound 96.4 FM. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 to 7 p.m.
Hello, my name is Brian Hughes and I'd like to invite you all to join me here on Liffey Sound 96.4 FM every Thursday evening from 6 to 7. I'll be playing some of the very best in traditional and folk music on my programme Ceol Galore. I'll be featuring some of the best new releases and we'll have interviews with musicians and singers who were involved in local, national and indeed worldwide projects. So until then, from myself, Brian Hughes, Gunyairi and Talat, agus Slán go fóill.
You're listening to Liffey Sound
On 96.4
FM. You're listening to Liffey Sound, www.liffeysound.com.
I don't know what happened there, folks. It started going a second time. And the text line is 087 062 7138. That's 087 062 7138 if you have any more comments. And just before I do go back to Nick, presenters are asked to read out that Lucan Live, our new daily talk programme, is broadcast Monday to Friday at 3 p.m. and repeated again at 10 after this show and any other show that's on at 9 o'clock at night. So you tune in for that. Good talk show. There's have some guests on that show. I've often listened to it on the way home in the car, as far as I can keep the station on the radio on the way home in the car, because you lose it when I get closer to my home. Anyway, I'm going to go straight back to Nick. Nick, you're still with me, is that right?
That's right.
That's
right. Yes.
So listen, I'm going to move back forward up to modern times as well, because I don't want to get hung up on the Second World War. If anybody wants to know about that, a documentary I would recommend to most people to watch is The Greatest Story Never Told. And I don't know if you've ever seen that, Nick, but it's an absolutely fantastic.
I've watched bits of it, yeah.
Yeah, it's 6 hours long now. It's a long old watch, but I mean, if you break it up into small segments and watch it over a few days, it's very well worth the watch. I'm not saying believe everything in it, but it certainly gives you a different perspective of what went on during the Second World War, and
I'm a great admirer, lover of German culture.
Yeah.
I think that's what got me into this position. I studied stuff from Germany in my youth, and quite a lot of stuff I've done in my life comes from what German people have done.
Well, the fact that Adolf Hitler was a reputed vegetarian and an absolutely avid lover of animals. I mean, he was the first world leader to bring in animal rights laws for animals. Yeah. And I'm saying to myself, if he cannot bring himself to treat an animal badly, well then I can't see him wanting to treat the rest of the world badly, So something doesn't sit right with who the man was and what he's been accused of.
He tried hard in the 1930s to bring in laws to regulate what planes were allowed to do and prevent city bombing and to restrict what military were allowed to do with very powerful weapons they had, so that the laws of war were more explicitly prohibiting the bombing of cities. But the other European nations didn't want to do that. But I think there was a record of Germany tried to do that quite a lot.
But particularly Churchill, I mean, he enjoyed bombing the crap out of Dresden, which was a non-military city. It had absolutely no strategic value whatsoever to anybody, and yet they bombed the crap out of him one night. You know,
May the 10th, he was elected in 1940, and the next day he gave the command to bomber command to go out and start bombing German cities. Okay, I don't think the British people were really told about this. It was rather secret.
Yeah,
and what he was trying to do was to get a response. You see, he knew that if you goad the Germans to start bombing London, then the British people would agree to his war.
And they'd get behind the war, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah, exactly what happened. But a lot of people don't realise what David Irving pointed out so very clearly, that 3 whole months went by with Britain bombing German cities and the Ruhr and the main industrial area before, and even Berlin, massive bombing attacks on Berlin. Still, Germany didn't respond. That was August. And then September the 6th, I think it was, the first German raid then came back on London, and East London was set on fire. And obviously Churchill was delighted because he knew then he'd finally got the war he wanted, that the British people would support him in war, because they hadn't been told that this was just a reprisal. They hadn't been told that we had been bombing Germany for months, and also hadn't been told that throughout what people still call the Battle of Britain and so on, and the Blitz, that a German peace offer was on the table. You stop bombing us, we'll stop bombing you. British people, to this day, I think they still don't believe that the whole Blitz could have been stopped if we just agreed stop bombing Germany. Yeah. And also, I think the British people, in my experience, have not got a clue about the massive ratio of, I think it's about 10 or 20 to 1, the tonnage of bombs, how much more bombs we dropped on Germany than they dropped on us. The German bombing of Britain was a tiny fraction of bombs
compared to what was done, and even what was done to Germany after the Second World War. David Irving goes into that quite a lot as well, which is quite horrendous. The way the German people were treated after the war. But well, I'm not going to get into too much of Germany because that's a subject for another show. And we do want to talk about false flags a little bit more.
If I could just say one thing.
Yeah, sure.
There's a very good book come out called "Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil" by Menuhin. He's the son of the musician Yehudi Menuhin. Yeah. And that book is selling very well, and I recommend it for just this subject that you were talking about. Okay, this whole subject.
How much the book called?
It's called "Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil."
Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil.
And it's a well-selling book. I think it's the top-selling revisionist book at the moment. I do recommend it as giving a picture of this whole area that you're talking about, Mick.
Right, that sounds very interesting. That's a book I would like to read now. I would definitely read a book like that. Now, talking about false flags again, the history of false flags, Nick, how far back does it go, do you think?
Well, I'm interested in the European perspective, okay?
Yeah.
And I mean, strictly speaking, the first false flag was, I would say it was Guy Fawkes in 1605, when the British intelligence set up this patsies to apparently look like they were blowing up Parliament, and they all got caught. And it was designed to start wars against Spain and to make Spain the new hated, demonised enemy. To make out that Catholics had done this. Okay.
All right. So it goes back that far. So.
It does go back that far, but the modern phenomenon, I would say it starts in Europe, with what's called Gladio. Gladio started in countries like Italy and Belgium, and this was in around 1980. But bombs started going off on train stations, and the communist cells were blamed in Gladio, and this was to delegitimize to give NATO power. Let's give power to NATO and reassure everybody there was a communist menace. Okay, people they wanted to put cruise missiles into Europe, and that the public there was a feeling the public didn't understand the communist message sufficiently, and that Gladio of placing bombs here and there, getting people thoroughly scared, and then trying to blame the left-wing communists, that was, I would say, the beginning of the modern phenomena in Europe. And then communists were still the enemy image, okay? Now, in the 21st century, what you've got at the beginning of the end of the last century was the disintegration of the whole communist enemy image, okay? Soviet Union folded up, 1991, and you had 10 whole years when the empire didn't have an enemy. Britain and America
enough.
had this real problem. Oh, God, what we do? We haven't got an enemy. And huge military budgets. What was going to happen? How could you keep going, especially with the hundreds of American bases all around the world, without an enemy? So the new enemy had to be brewed up, very sort of shortening the story, and the Islamic menace became credible. Okay, and you obviously got with 9/11, you got 19 Islamic hijackers were dreamed up. That these didn't really exist. That they were fake identities, and 8 of them were still alive after the event. And that there was identity theft from people mainly living in Saudi Arabia, and so on. And likewise, with the London bombing, you got an imaginary threat of Islamic menace, supposedly, that had done this. And so they keep trying to give us the story of a Islamic menace, which well, I'm not saying there is no threat from Islam in our modern world. Obviously there is, but not this particular kind of threat. The big, spectacular terror events in our modern world are really state fabricated.
But like 9/11, for example, for anybody with, I suppose, half a bloody brain cell, look deep enough into 9/11. It's blatantly obvious that Osama bin Laden had absolutely nothing to do with it. He didn't have he wouldn't have the ability, I mean, we're led to believe that here is a man, Osama bin Laden, sat in a cave in Afghanistan with a laptop, conducting and directing this
dying of kidney failure,
and some other disease, the Marfan's disease or whatever it was that he had, and he's supposed to direct this event on 9/11 from a cave in Afghanistan. Now, I'd like to know what kind of internet connection he had for a start if he was able to do this, but it's blatantly obvious. 2 planes can't bring down 3 buildings. So, for me, that's the smoking gun. And the fact that there's no images of anything hitting the Pentagon.
Just for the record, there's about 4 different intel, different countries monitoring bin Laden, and they were recording the phone calls he made to his mother. But those are the one, recorded phone calls that of the real bin Laden that he really made in those last years of his life. Last days of his life, December 2001. He would call his mother from inside those caves, and as you say, that was about it. But I mean, what is so bewildering is that we don't have a single politician in Europe prepared to speak any words of truth about the 9/11 event. And even university students, I used to think they were, radical and revolutionary. They'd want the truth. No, you don't get a peep from any. There's no university departments or 9/11 truth groups that will want to hear about what really happened. It just bewilders me.
How do you think they brought the towers down? Do you think it was some sort of an exotic weapon or controlled demolition, like a standard demolition?
Yeah, the former. Yeah, it was some sort of exotic weapon, which is partly the strength of the whole thing. That what happened was very, very strange. And it's very easy for the media to scoff at it if you start to have a look.
Yeah, because they think you're a head case if you mention directed energy weapons or something like that. But I mean, if you look at those buildings on the way down, even Dr. Judy Wood points it out, they're vaporising on the way down.
Yeah,
they're literally vaporising
on the way down. They're disintegrating on the way down. They don't really hit the bottom. They're not really collapsing, and no passenger planes hit those towers. Whatever went into those towers, maybe something quite small. It wasn't passenger planes. None of the 4 crash sites had passenger planes impact.
Sure, even the plane that allegedly crash landed in Shanksville in Pennsylvania.
Shanksville, yeah.
Now we have an Irish comedian over here, a guy called Maxwell. I'm not sure of his first name now. He's not a very good comedian. I don't even like the guy. But he made 2 documentaries for the BBC. He made one on 7/7.
Oh yeah,
where they got some explosives expert to blow the shit out of a bus in a quarry, which literally blew this bus to smithereens. Probably used about 50 pounds of Semtex to blow her up, and says, and then says that's how they did it in London. And then how he explained it when he moved on to the 9/11 conspiracy. Here's how he explained the plane. He explained the Twin Towers dropping by using Lego, and he pushed it over. Right? I'm not kidding you. This is in a BBC documentary.
It's what you expect from a BBC documentary.
Right?
Yeah,
but here's how he explained the plane in Shanksville. He had a bowl of flour, plain white flour, and he dropped a marble into the plain white flour. And what would happen when the marble hit the flour is once the marble hit, the flour collapsed in on top of it. Well, he said that the plane hit the ground so hard that the ground caved in on top of it. And I'm saying, well, why don't they dig it up?
Exactly, yeah.
But they haven't, because there was no plane in Shanksville. Nothing hit the ground.
No, there was no remains. And
there was nothing there whatsoever.
No bodies. There are no bodies either. The coroner couldn't find any bodies. I mean, there was stuff strewn over about 8 or 10 miles of land around there. Yeah. I think planes had exploded up in the sky, and wreckage had been strewn around, but
not a passenger plane.
Not really human bodies.
Yeah.
I think that Flight 93 there did dock down at Ohio or somewhere in the West, through the West Country. That plane and swapped over with an empty plane. The plane that then flew up and was blown out of the sky didn't have real passengers in it, in my opinion, as far as I could make out. That's the story. Flight 93 that was supposed to have impacted into Shanksville, as you say. Something was blown out of the sky. Nothing much impacted at that site that the media were told about. So, I mean, I think it's a fascinating story. I love it. I love all the details of.
I've looked at a lot of 9/11 stuff now myself over the last 15 years. Quite a lot of stuff. I'm quite satisfied to believe that it's the official version of events just don't add up. The official story is hogwash.
Certainly not.
There was something else going on.
We can all agree on that. It's a lot harder to say what did happen, though.
That's why I would never speculate on what did happen, because I'm not an expert and I wasn't there, so I don't know what happened. But there's no way do I believe that two planes hit three buildings and knocked the three of them down. It couldn't have happened.
No, as you say, nothing much hit Building 7, and that impacted in the afternoon.
Yeah.
In fact, all seven buildings were destroyed.
Yeah, they were as well, yeah.
All buildings owned by Larry Silverstein were totally pulverised, and all buildings not owned by Larry Silverstein remained strangely undamaged. That's all 7 World Trade Center buildings were pulverised on that day. It wasn't just the 2 skyscrapers.
And do you think, Nick, 9/11 was in the planning quite a long time, or do you think it was something that was just put together fairly quickly?
Quite a long time. Whoever did it, I mean, it's the highest level of the neocons, the American military, allied together with the with Zionists, international Zionists, planning that event, and it was very much done by intelligence. It was a computer-type operation, with a lot of sort of video imagery of stuff that looked real and wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it did use exotic technology.
We've all seen the movie Armageddon, which was from the mid-90s, 97, 98, I think. And, the CGI in that movie makes it look like an asteroid is heading towards Earth. And it looks quite genuine. It looks quite real. So, I mean, in the movies, they can put anything they want onto a TV screen and make it look good. And I've seen videos recently on YouTube where some guy had, I don't know what kind of technology he had on his computer, but he was able to manipulate George W. Bush talking in real time, and he was able to change what he was saying.
Huh? Yeah.
So...
Yeah, it is spooky, isn't it?
It is very spooky, what they can do. And I mean, the technology that we've got, in our hands today, these people have probably had that kind of stuff 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, Rumsfeld announced on the 10th of September that $2.3 trillion had gone missing from the Pentagon budget. And, we'd never heard of trillions of dollars before. That's about the first time we heard of trillions, wasn't it?
And it's never been talked about since. They still haven't found that money yet.
No. As if he was hoping that announcement would get buried in what he was expecting would happen the next day.
And that's exactly what happened. It did get buried.
Did get buried, right, yeah.
Except for people like yourself who like to remind people that he did say that the day before 9/11.
What I say in my new book is that the Israeli... former Prime Minister turned up in the British studio. His name is Ehud Barak, okay? He turns up in the BBC studio on the morning of 9/11 before the towers had even fallen, okay? The planes had gone in, and he started calling for operational concrete war against terror, and talking about Al Qaeda, talking about who the blame was, who had done it, right? Al Qaeda, and so he was on BBC Worldwide calling for this global war on terror before the towers had even fallen. So in these state fabricated terror events, the empire tells you who the enemy is. It tells you who to hate and fear, just in the same way as Tony Blair told us on the same day of the London bombing. That afternoon, he flew down back to Scotland and said, "We know that this is an Islamic crime." Okay, so he said, "We know that." So that was to direct everyone on the very first day, make sure that you get the right person to hate and fear, because that's the point of the whole operation. The point is that you hate the enemy and you will agree to the new war or continuation of the war, whatever.
Yeah. And like 7/7 hasn't been the only so-called false flag that's happened in London. We've had Woolwich, where Lee Rigby was allegedly
successful. Amazing. Just one single guy was supposed to have died, and I spent quite a lot of time trying to find out, was he real? Was he a real identity? Drummer Lee Rigby, pictures all look photoshopped, and didn't get a birth certificate, and he changed his name halfway through, and the army barracks he was supposed to belong to had closed down a couple of years before the event, so it means you couldn't check the records, the whole story was a physically impossible setup of how this guy was supposed to have driven a car and swerved over the road and got up on the pavement and hit this guy, decapitated him, pulled him out in the middle of the road. And it was just a dummy. That's all it was, dummy. And then bothered to put any blood around, Yeah, fake blood is very dodgy in these fabricated terror events.
And they're still keeping that story alive, because one of the guys that's supposed to be in prison, one of the guys who allegedly did it,
Adi Bellagio,
yeah, that guy, Adi Bellagio, yes. I think he's sued the prison system or something like that for some compensation for something, and he's due a large payout, so there's a bit of uproar going on over that, saying he shouldn't get it, like, and whatnot, But I think it's probably just bullshit, because they're just trying to keep that story alive.
You never know. With the Patsy has to disappear, and he has to take the blame, and he's not allowed. The one thing that cannot happen is that he's allowed so that journalists can talk to him and you hear his story. You never hear his story, right? All you saw at Adi Bellagio, you saw him standing on that pavement, you saw his hands totally red with his photoshopped blood.
Yeah, I've seen that. It looked a bit ridiculous, all right.
And his hands would be waving around, and the blood would sometimes come off the hands, if you noticed.
Yeah.
The red colour wouldn't always keep up with his hands. Sometimes it looked like it was on the trees behind him. So it was just photoshopped onto his hands. And he had this brandishing this axe. And while he was doing this, a little old lady just
walking by with a shopping trolley. I seen that, and I thought that was, I'm not going to say funny, but it just looked very strange to me,
Well, yeah, it was just, and behind him in the distance, you could see a whole row of these actors just waiting. As if waiting to be told what to do.
Waiting to be told when to move in,
about 20 yards away. And this road, you could see all the traffic had been blocked off from the road. That's what they have to do. I mean, normally, if you go to that street, Artillery Road, it's absolutely chock-a-block with traffic. There's no way you can just drive up and swerve across the road and whatever. And we actually found a notice, an official London Transport notice saying they had blocked off the traffic at 1 o'clock. That's an hour before the event happened. Traffic closure, 1 o'clock. Oh, yeah, right. So it was just theatre. They had a huge white lorry, which they presumably pulled out. Had this crumpled up car on the pavement, right? Which presumably they pulled out from the back of the lorry, and the witnesses all kind of would see that car. There was nobody witnessed a car driving up, or the car hitting anything. That was just a stage prop, and the witnesses would say they saw it.
Yeah. It's nuts. Listen, I need to go to one more ad. It's another ad for about a minute or so. So do you mind hanging on?
Sure, yeah.
That'll be great. Folks, be back in 2 minutes with Nick Kollerstrom.
You're listening to Liffey Sound, www.liffeysoundfm.ie. Listen online. Community radio at its best.
Tune in every Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. for Ultrasounds on Liffey Sound 96.4 FM or www.liffeysoundfm.ie.
Have you taken our advice and explored the many attractions in our lovely Liffey Valley? There's so much to enjoy in the Liffey Valley. lovely parks, riverside walks, historic houses, water sports, children's play areas and much, much more. The Liffey Valley Park Alliance continues its work for the preservation of this marvellous amenity and its picturesque landscapes. You can play your part by using its various facilities. If you have not already done so, start now. You won't regret it.
Danger, danger! If sore necks, ringing in your ears and mosh pits are your thing, check out High Voltage with me, Dave Darcy, for all things rock, metal and punk. Every Monday evening from 7 to 9 on Liffey Sound 96.4 FM.
Danger, danger! High voltage! Bring the talent and lead with cheers.
Local programs, local presenters, local news. Tune to Liffey Sound 96.4 FM.
Now, folks, you're very welcome back. Text line is 087 062 7138. That's 087 062 7138. Now, Nick, I just want to ask you, what do you think the overall agenda is with these presumed false flag events? Where is England and Britain, and where's it headed with all of this?
Well, hopefully we're headed into people discovering the truth about these things, getting fed up with this crappy, horrible narrative, and demanding that they want newspapers that will tell them the truth. And they will not buy newspapers that give them these crappy fake stories with illusory, faked up events. I mean, these fake terror events are getting cheaper and cheaper. You know, you get with the Syrian war, you get somebody with a sort of rubber knife wearing black, claiming to be stabbing some other guy. And you don't see any blood. You see a bit of fake blood at the end. I mean, it's such a cheap event. And I think people are just going to start to find they no longer believe this. And newspaper sales are plummeting now because people are fed up with what journalists tell them. Hopefully, we face a future which some kind of truth will emerge. And it's a very strange and interesting predicament that we're in now in this 21st century. People think civilization needs different things at different times. Does it need science? You know, does it need religion? And I would say what it needs most of all in this present time isn't any new technology gizmos, or maybe not as such a new religious belief. What we need is a philosophical ability to see what is illusory and unreal and reject it. And get some apprehension of what happens. This whole new century started off with the 9/11, in which the deaths are real, but the story is bogus.
Yeah.
And that is the narrative we keep giving again and again. And perhaps the Irish people could have some special ability, as they're not directly involved in this, and as they suffered a lot from British imperialism, to have a movement that would see this,
but we still do. I mean, a lot of Irish people have the misconception that Ireland is free and independent of the British. We're not. Ireland never gained its independence. The British still have a de facto government running things in this country. You know, we've got what's. I mean, they call it Dáil Éireann over here, but it's not actually Dáil. Dáil Éireann has never sat in Leinster House where the government sit.
Sorry, what is that, Dáil Éireann?
Yeah, our Parliament is called the Dáil.
Oh, right.
Yeah, DAIL, that's how it's spelled. But the Dáil Éireann, which is like the official Irish Parliament, has never actually sat in government buildings. What actually sits there is what's called the Oireachtas, which I think is an Irish word for Parliament. I'm not sure, but I call it the Royal Oireachtas because it was given to us by King George V. I.e., in 1918 there was a 32 county election in this country, and the Irish Republican Brotherhood were given a mandate to run the country, but King George V declared it an illegal assembly and gave us the Oireachtas, and that's what we still have to this day. So we don't actually have what the Irish think they have, you know. There's a big scam going on in this country, you know, and you know when you think about it, I mean, Britain ran this country for 800 years. They weren't going to give it up without a fight, and it looked like they gave it up with just a small fight. They didn't give it up. They gave us the illusion that they gave it up, but they didn't, you know. So
right. Okay. Well, I urge people in Ireland to form truth groups and. Be able to say no to war. The reasons for war were given are bullshit. NATO is a club of white nations that bombs brown nations, and we've got to say no to it. This is a horrendous thing. It's not to anyone's benefit, and it always gives us bogus fairy tales from hell, gives us these fairy tales from hell that keep hitting the headlines. And it's the nature of the illusion that it quickly appeals to your worst emotions of fear and hate and terror, okay?
Yeah.
And then when the truth starts to come out a few weeks later or a few months later, it's no longer news. Oh, no, forget it. Sorry, that's yesterday's story. So what hits the news appeals to fear, and people are made to live in fear.
Yeah.
And I think we need to live together and say, actually, we don't need the fear.
Yeah, there actually are in this country. I was reading on the Irish news media today, the Dublin City Council are going to be erecting what they're calling diversity barriers in and around the city centre to stop so-called terrorist attacks. So they're putting concrete barriers, like what they have in London outside Parliament.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
To stop trucks and stuff like that driving up onto the pavement.
Yeah.
So I think they're warming the Irish up now for a possible Islamic terrorist attack.
Yeah, well, did it really happen? Look at those stories of trucks driving on the pavement, like Westminster. Yeah, look at my analysis of the Westminster Bridge event. I mean, it didn't bloody happen, okay?
Not the way they said it happened.
It was impossible. It's up on my blog, terroronthetube.com, .co.uk, Terror on the Tube. That is my website. You can find analysis, deconstruction of the Westminster Bridge event. And that was done with actors. Modern state fabricated terror is done with actors and dummies, okay? It no longer has real dead people. They're much too much trouble. You get much too much difficulty. And there's reports of, hospitals on, but you look close up, and it's just dummies, fake blood, actors. I mean, the one definite death in the whole Westminster thing was probably the patsy, the guy they blamed. He had to be really dead to take the blame. And a police officer may have died. It's rather doubtful. But it's done with actors. So I urge people listening to this, don't think that you live in such a frightening world that lorries are liable to... it's like another fake story, Nice, the big white lorry. That was actually the last chapter of my book, Chronicle of False Flag Terror. The idea that a large, huge white lorry started going on a mad rampage, running over people on the holiday Riviera in France. It really didn't happen. It's done with dolls, actors. It was all prepared, and that big white lorry just drove along the street for a bit. So we need to get a close-up focus and deconstruct these events and say we don't need the fear. I mean, with that big...
And that's really all it is, isn't it, at the end of the day? It's just like fear porn.
Yeah, it is fear porn. That's a phrase Ola Damagard uses, a very good phrase, fear porn. We're just given fear porn. I mean, like that big white lorry in Nice, this driver from Tunisia was blamed, and he wasn't there. There are no pictures of that lorry with the driver even in it. It might have been remotely driven, I don't know. But the guy in Tunisia was saying, sorry, I've been in Tunisia, I wasn't in Paris at all, I didn't do it. It's identity theft that is used in these events. And that's why I recommend that it's worth bothering to deconstruct these fictional terror events, because there's some kind of power which wants us to live in fear.
Yeah.
We've got to say no, we've got to resist that and say no, that's not what we're here for. We didn't come here to live in fear. We want to try and discover what it means to be human. And part of the mystery of this 21st century concerns the idea of the phantom menace, okay? What is the phantom menace?
It's a fake fear, isn't it? That's exactly what it is.
It's fake fear, and I recommend, I use actually the first 3 Star Wars films, which are the ones that George Lucas made last, and these were filmed just over the years of the 9/11 event.
Yeah.
And they described the mocking up of a phantom menace by this strange evil power, he calls it the Sith, which are there to destroy democracy, destroy the Republic, and take over absolute autocratic power. And there may be a message here for our own time, some kind of power trying to achieve world domination, and we're not quite sure what it is,
Yeah.
But it keeps giving us these fake stories. And part of the purpose of these fake stories is to take away our freedoms, take away our liberties, and impose more and more restrictions on us.
And make us all slaves. Not that we're not all slaves already, financial slaves. Now listen, I want to mention the conference. You're coming over to Ireland in March, and you're going to be...
I'm looking forward to that, the Open Minds Conference.
You're going to be at the Open Minds Conference in Dooley's Hotel in Waterford.
They cancelled Ole Damagard, he couldn't come, so I was invited instead.
Oh, is Ole not? He's not going now. Ole, is he not? Oh, that's
he's not. No.
Okay.
You got me and Mark Devlin. Mark Devlin's he's a very good speaker.
Yeah, I've had Mark on my show last year, and I'm due to get him back on soon enough as well.
I'm looking forward to seeing him again. I was last at Copenhagen. There was an Open Mind conference there, and I thought it was really good.
They're good. They're good conferences. They're great eye openers, and you meet some wonderful people at them as well. That's what I like about them.
Indeed, yeah. It's a 2 or 3 day event, and Waterford, isn't it?
It's in Waterford, yeah. Dooley's Hotel in Waterford. I was there last year. I was at the first one.
Sorry?
I was at the first one last year in Waterford.
Oh, was that the first one? Right.
No, I was at the first one last year. This is the second one they've done.
Yeah.
The Awaken Awareness South East Ireland group, Trevor Evers and his colleagues, you know Trevor, he's been in contact with you.
That's right,
They said done an absolutely fantastic job in putting this together. You know, they're amateurs, they're not professionals or anything they do. They just have a passion for the truth, and they want the truth to get out there, and fair play to them.
That's great, yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. And
you're a great catch for that now, and I'm sure they're absolutely delighted to have you at that. Without a shadow of a doubt. And I'll be down there myself, so hopefully we will meet up, and we might have a pint if you're partial to a pint.
Great, yeah.
We'll have a pint in the bar. Just on a light note, I've got about 4 minutes left. Now I was watching you today, and this is something Mark Devlin talks about quite a lot as well. Is Paul McCartney.
Huh? Oh, yeah, right.
A big conspiracy. Now, I was never aware of this until I came across Mark Devlin's work, that Paul McCartney allegedly died in 1966 and was replaced by a guy called, what was his name? The fake Paul McCartney, if you want to call him that. I don't know.
Fall, let's call him Fall.
Fall, yes. I'm not sure of the guy's name now, but he was supposed to be over another band or something like that. But
well, nobody quite knew where he came from, did he?
Now, I was looking, you were putting pictures up in the video that you had up earlier on that I was watching, and you were showing comparisons between the two alleged Paul McCartneys, and there are some mad differences between the two of them. They do look like two different people.
Yeah, they do, yeah. It's
so why would they? So if he did die...
Let me say, just to contrast what we've been talking about before, Mick, that this is a happy subject.
Yeah.
When it makes people feel good. All the stuff we've been talking about previously is very dark.
It is.
And people can get into despair. I don't recommend that despair at all. I think you've got to believe we have some sort of hope. But the whole Beatle Paul McCartney story is fun. It cheers people up, makes people laugh, and it makes you want to listen to the old Beatles records again. So it's a good subject. I would recommend for if you've got any sort of conspiracy conference, weave that in as a really fun topic.
Something to lighten up the day.
Something to lighten up the day, yeah. And I would say, having done that book a couple of years ago, that you get the true, real meaning of the Beatles, wonderful meaning of the Beatles songs.
Yeah, because there's a lot of symbolism in their songs, isn't there?
Yeah, the enormous stresses they went through is that they had to go through this incredibly weird identity change, their beloved Paul disappearing and this new guy appearing and replacing him. It was an incredibly strange experience for them.
Yeah. It'd make you wonder why John Lennon was assassinated. Maybe he knew something about that and wanted to get the truth out there,
both him and George.
And George, someone tried to stab him before he died as well.
Both lived in great fear years before exactly what exactly happened to them. They're both sort of expecting it,
Strange. Well, Nick, listen, unfortunately I've come up to the end of the show. I've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to have to let you go. Thanks very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Okay, mate. I look forward to having a pint with you at Waterford.
Definitely. I'll be down in Waterford, so hopefully we'll hook up in Waterford and we'll see you down there.
Okay, cheers.
That's great. Thanks very much, Nick. You take care and I'll talk to you very soon. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Nick Kollerstrom. He's an author. He's wrote several books on the Holocaust. He's wrote books on 7/7 and 9/11 and plenty of other subjects as well. He's a very interesting character. As I said, he's going to be appearing at the Open Minds 2. the second Open Minds conference in Dooley's Hotel in Waterford in March, so go along to that. It'll be a great conference. If you want to know more about the conference, go on to the World You Don't Know page. There's loads of links on there for the conference, or you can go on to openmindsconference.com and have a look there and I think it's 50 odd quid for a weekend pass, if I'm not mistaken, and there's good room rates for Dooley's Hotel as well. You don't have to go for all 3 days. It's on for the 3 days. It's on for Friday, Saturday and Sunday. I think the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of March. I'm not sure the exact dates. You can check my World You Don't Know page for that. But you can go down on any given day and have a look and see who's speaking and who's not speaking and whatnot, and just head along on a day that suits yourself. Anyway, this has been The World You Don't Know. Sorry I've run out of time, folks, and remember, as I always say in the show, the world is full of great people. If you can't find one, be one. Until next time, you take care. Bye-bye.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Waking humanity, one soul at a time. This is The World You Don't Know radio show with your host, Nick O'Connell.